The archivist paused beneath the dim municipal records room light, fingers hovering over a sealed evidence envelope, as the faint smell of dust and metal filings rose, and the chilling realization settled that the timestamp on the preserved email printout predated the victim's confirmed death by 3 full days already. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Richmond, Virginia, in the fall of 2000 carried the weight of early digital transitions. Dial-up tones, public library computer labs, and inboxes still regarded as curiosities rather than essential life channels. When 22-year-old university student and part-time bookstore clerk Emily R. Whittaker disappeared on October 11, the city was cooling under a gray seasonal drift, the James River swollen from recent rain, and the campus sidewalks slick with matted leaves. She was last seen near Grove Avenue after an evening shift, walking toward her small rented upper-floor unit on Belmont. The missing person bulletin, first photocopied at a drugstore, traveled swiftly through campus corkboards, coffee shop windows, and commuter rail stops. Her face, bordered by municipal type, became a fixed presence in the collective eye of the neighborhood. The case took its first disturbing turn 48 hours after her disappearance, when her employer received an email from her university account indicating she had chosen to travel unexpectedly and needed several days away. The phrasing was formal, almost distant, unlike her typical messages. Investigators later noted that the tone lacked her distinct linguistic habits evident across earlier course correspondence. Still, in 2000, email authentication was rudimentary, and server logs were not automatic law enforcement priorities. The message introduced uncertainty, encouraging the early assumption that she might have left voluntarily, postponing immediate grid-based search operations. That assumption collapsed on October 15, when her bag was found near the underpass at the I-195 connector, its contents undisturbed except for her missing student ID and a single damaged key. Cold air from the river bridge alignment rustled the police tape, and detectives began shifting from welfare check posture to active investigation mode. Richmond police canvassed the paths leading from her workplace to her apartment, logging interviews with night shift commuters, rideshare taxi operators, and a small circle of bookstore colleagues. The city's local press, anchored by the Richmond Times-Dispatch, printed a concise notice, cautioning restraint while acknowledging the rising community concern. 5 days later, in a thickly wooded setback near Powhite Parkway, search volunteers discovered remains later confirmed through dental records to be Emily's. Despite the calibrated language of the official report, the condition suggested rapid concealment in a location chosen for minimal human passage rather than spontaneous disposal. Autopsy evaluation indicated no struggle-associated fracturing, but confirmed cause of death consistent with asphyxiation. Toxicology yielded no controlled substances. Weather data recorded the nights during her disappearance as unseasonably cold, and the medical examiner concluded the timeline of death aligned with the night she vanished, not the period implied by the email. The email thus became the focal anomaly. Investigators obtained a warrant for her digital records from the campus IT department, a sleepy annex of beige terminals and aging tape backups. In 2000, server retention was inconsistent, but staff managed to recover DHCP logs dated October 12. The timestamp indicated the login originated off-campus, using a local dial-up internet provider. The physical address tied to that connection belonged to a short-term rental on South Laurel Street, leased at the time by 25-year-old graduate student and freelance computer repair operator, Thomas Avery. His name had appeared peripherally in earlier interviews. A customer at the bookstore, known on and off, familiar enough to have engaged in routine small talk, but with no documented social connection. Detectives approached Avery through formal channels. His apartment, with its mismatched furniture and shelves of obsolete hardware, contained redundant laptops, boot disks, and early email spoofing utilities he claimed were used to assist local businesses transitioning online. He denied involvement, citing his open computer workspace where others, he suggested, might have accessed his machines. Without direct physical evidence tying him to Emily, law enforcement lacked statutory grounds to detain him. Nevertheless, his residence was added to a quiet surveillance rotation, noted in the supplemental police log, page-coded and initialed in blue ink. Winter pressed in. The media coverage receded to smaller columns, overshadowed by election cycles and shifting national priorities. Still, on the second floor of the Richmond courthouse annex, the file persisted. A thick binder of photocopied parking records, path analyses, autopsy addenda, printed server logs, and search grid annotations. Digital forensics remained a developing science, but by mid-2001, the FBI's regional cyber unit began supporting local departments to tackle unsolved cases with electronic components. Emily's case re-entered active review. The email headers, once considered tangential, were re-evaluated using updated analytic tools. Embedded routing data revealed a manual timestamp override, executed minutes after her death window as estimated by the pathologist. This made the act not incidental but planned. A secondary notebook recovered from Avery's apartment 6 months earlier, originally deemed irrelevant, was re-examined. The pages contained hexadecimal strings and modem access codes, now recognizable as dial-in credentials for specific regional servers used by campus networks. The alignment between these codes and the recovered email trace became the connective tissue investigators required. A warrant for Avery's archived drives was granted. Forensic examiners, using newly acquired write-block tools to prevent contamination, extracted a series of deleted partitions. Among routine repair logs, they uncovered a folder containing address lists, library card scans, and portions of student email directories. In the folder's subdirectory, a compressed file included fragments of Emily's personal emails copied weeks before her disappearance. The metadata showed Avery harvested the messages while repairing a campus kiosk terminal where Emily had logged in earlier that semester. No direct harm could be proven solely from the data capture, but the presence of her information on his drive invalidated his claims of casual acquaintance. Physical evidence supplemented the digital. A vacuum filter sample from his apartment, retained during the original search, was retested with enhanced fiber comparison methods. Microscopic analysis identified a match with carpet fibers from Emily's apartment hallway, indicating she had been in proximity to his living space or his clothing had been in proximity to hers. The chain of custody, meticulously documented, preserved admissibility. With cumulative evidence now surpassing probable cause thresholds, investigators obtained an arrest warrant. Avery was taken into custody in late July 2002 without incident. During pretrial proceedings, his defense argued that digital forensics of the era lacked standardized certification, and that file manipulation could not be conclusively attributed to him alone. Prosecutors countered with testimony from the cyber unit, detailing login credentials, dial-up origin traces, and timestamp engineering. The email sent after Emily's death, the quiet fulcrum of the entire investigation, became the centerpiece of prosecutorial narrative not through drama, but through systematic reconstruction of motive and access. Court transcripts documented a subdued atmosphere, attorneys speaking evenly, evidence introduced with procedural precision, jurors taking notes beneath the steady hum of the courthouse HVAC system. Richmond's press covered the trial in short columns, avoiding sensationalism, focusing on the matter-of-fact timeline of data misuse leading to physical crime. When the verdict arrived, the language was simple and direct: guilty of second-degree murder and unlawful digital intrusion. Sentencing was delivered with equal restraint: 30 years, with no eligibility for early release during the first 20. By early winter, the courthouse file was sealed except for appellate references. Emily's family, who had traveled quietly between Virginia and their home in North Carolina, declined further interviews. Her former workplace replaced her name tag on a bookshelf memorial, framed next to faded campus flyers. The apartment on Belmont was vacated and repainted, its new tenants unaware of the earlier search lights, fingerprint dust, and sealed entry protocols. Digital forensics in Richmond evolved from this case, prompting policy adjustments for server log retention and coordinated cross-department review of electronic evidence. At Virginia Commonwealth University, lab technicians instituted new access controls after the revelation that simple kiosk repairs could compromise personal records. The city, through modest municipal budget allocations, expanded its capacity for digital authentication, ensuring that future anomalies in email logs or timestamp irregularities would not languish in evaluative limbo. In the municipal archive, the envelope containing the printed email remains stored under controlled conditions. Its edges are fragile, ink slightly faded, header lines almost archaic in their early internet simplicity. Yet the document stands as a marker of procedural evolution, a reminder that forensic certainty in the early digital age required patience, iterative analysis, and an unwavering focus on small inconsistencies. The email that arrived after Emily's death, once perceived as a confusing footnote, ultimately provided the clarity necessary to close the case, not through shock or spectacle, but through the quiet precision of investigative persistence. The second phase of the Richmond case file, finalized after conviction, but expanded through quiet institutional review, revealed how the mechanisms of early digital communication played a decisive role in a crime that outwardly resembled countless disappearance investigations of the late 20th century. By 2003, the Regional Cyber Task Force began compiling retrospective summaries to understand the procedural gaps that had initially delayed the urgency of Emily's search. These summaries were not written for public consumption or press distribution, but circulated internally to police trainees and evidence technicians to demonstrate how a single email, wrongly interpreted as proof of continued movement and voluntary departure, could distort the investigative timeline. Emily had been declared missing on October 11, but the received message, stamped as October 14 on the bookstore server, made it appear she retained agency and intention, even though medical and forensic review concluded her death had occurred on the very night she vanished. The misalignment between biological time and digital time, though subtle, had reshaped the first critical 48 hours. As investigators reconstructed the case after Avery's sentencing, they cataloged interviews originally considered peripheral. A shift supervisor from the bookstore remembered Emily staying late to reconcile inventory before the pre-holiday shipment. A university registrar confirmed she had been scheduled for advising the next morning and had never missed prior appointments. A friend recalled that Emily emailed infrequently and preferred writing by hand, underscoring how atypical the message's tone had been. Each recollection, neutral in isolation, added weight to the understanding that the email had not only been forged but crafted to mimic polite withdrawal, purchasing time for concealment. The training summary noted that Avery's background in computer systems did not immediately nominate him as a violent offender. He had no prior record, no visible financial stress, and no known disputes. He frequented public technology events, assisted other students with hardware failures, and had briefly volunteered in the community computer lab. This outward normalcy, combined with the early 2000's assumption that computer skills implied socially isolated harmlessness, contributed to the initial dismissal of digital angle as secondary to physical search. Yet the archived forensic notes described in neutral language how access, not temperament, governed his capability. Possession of copied credentials, familiarity with campus login patterns, and knowledge of timestamp offset tools constituted opportunity. In a series of internal memos preserved by the Richmond Police Department's administrative office, the detectives outlined the structural challenge of interpreting crime scenes during a technological transition. Email servers at the time lacked hard-coded authentication stamps that could verify originating device, geographical location, and time zone calibration. The timestamp manipulation detected on Avery's recovered drive required manual forensic extraction unavailable during the opening days of the case. In retrospect, this was not framed as investigative failure, but as chronological inevitability. The methods that solved the case did not exist when the case began. Throughout 2003, police instructors used Emily's file to emphasize record retention. The original search of Avery's apartment, though careful, lacked the authority of advances that would arrive just months later. His vacuum filter sample, saved almost incidentally under secondary evidence code, became crucial only after fiber analysis techniques improved. Had that single evidence bag been discarded under routine disposal schedules, retesting would have been impossible. The fiber match linked his environment to her hallway, establishing proximity, refuting his assertion of distant acquaintance. It was procedural diligence rather than immediate insight that preserved this thread of proof. The internal summaries also chronicled the modest public aftermath. Richmond residents, though unsettled, did not react with sensational alarm. The news cycle of 2000 and 2001 carried broader national narratives that overshadowed regional crime coverage. Still, in certain pockets of the city, the bookstore's back office, the campus bulletin board where her flyer remained tacked beneath layers of fatting ink, the narrow rental corridor where neighbors remembered quiet search teams, her absence lingered. Contemporary notes from a neighborhood association meeting indicated that residents requested additional street lighting and secure call boxes along student walking routes. By mid-2002, before Avery's arrest but after reclassification of the case as active digital intrusion, the City Council approved minor infrastructure improvements near the I-195 commuter corridor and the wooded setback where volunteers found her. As legal analysts revisited trial sequence, they noted the prosecutorial restraint. Emily's personal information never became spectacle. Details unrelated to evidentiary function were omitted. Her schedule, relationships, and private communications were referenced only when necessary to verify timelines or contradict the staged email. The judge, in sentencing remarks included in the archival transcript, referenced the case as a turning point in evidentiary thresholds for electronic manipulation. Prior rulings often treated digital interference as adjunct to physical crime. Here, the forged email was not accessory but centerpiece, not distraction but instrument of deceit. A muted academic interest followed. In 2004, a criminal justice symposium at the University of Virginia cited the Richmond case without disclosing names, highlighting the forensic shift that made digital artifacts equal to biological samples in probative value. Presenters spoke in measured tones about chain-of-custody protocols, metadata integrity, and the ethics of retroactive digital examination. Emily's case, unnamed but unmistakably referenced, illustrated how early technological vulnerabilities allowed identity impersonation with minimal immediate risk of traceability. Within Richmond's municipal archive, the final evaluator's note carried no dramatic phrasing. It simply stated that the email no longer represented confusion but confirmation, a deliberate post-mortem communication authored to obscure the point of disappearance and extend the offender's anonymity. The printed server logs, once technical abstractions, were annotated with date-corrected context and retained indefinitely as training reference. Emily's family did not pursue civil claims. Their presence in the legal record concluded with acknowledgement of sentencing and a brief sealed statement. The bookstore hired temporary staff, and her apartment lease transitioned with no memorial designation. The city moved forward on ordinary terms, the case resolving not into collective trauma but into institutional memory. For detectives, analysts, and archivists, she became a case number linked to policy revision, illustrating how quiet consistency over months, not rapid breakthrough, produced resolution. In later years, as former investigators retired, they occasionally cited the case during exit interviews stored in administrative logs. Their reflections never dwelled on motive, which remained formally unarticulated and legally irrelevant after conviction. Instead, they emphasized timing, the narrow window between disappearance and digital imitation, the months between arrest and forensic validation, the years between initial uncertainty and procedural closure. The Richmond case taught that crime could adopt new forms without altering its fundamental reliance on misdirection, and that law enforcement, when adapting to emerging digital frameworks, needed endurance more than instinct. By 2005, the Municipal Archive formally reclassified the case under closed forensic status. The envelope containing the printed email, once subject to active examination, was moved to climate-controlled storage. Its ink continued to fade gently under archival light, the timestamp still visible but now contextually irrelevant. No plaques, anniversaries, or public retrospectives followed. Instead, the case existed as evidence of the period itself, the pivot when crime entered the network domain, and when police, prosecutors, and digital technicians first realized that a message received could contradict lived reality, and that certainty could not be assumed simply because an inbox showed new activity. The quiet resolution, stripped of spectacle, rested in the fact that the false email, designed to erase urgency, eventually supplied it. In the final consolidation of the Richmond case, investigators approached their closing work not with urgency, but with the deliberate cadence of a file that had fulfilled its judicial purpose and now required historical stability. The digital traces had been validated, the physical fibers matched, and the timeline of the fabricated email permanently corrected in official record. What remained in the months after Avery's sentencing was not the pursuit of additional evidence, but the arrangement of a procedural template so future investigations would not misread electronically generated signals during the most vulnerable early hours of a disappearance. The city's forensic unit collected notes from each division involved: patrol officers who conducted the initial welfare check at Emily's apartment, cyber specialists who translated modem logs into prosecutable proof, medical examiners who affirmed that estimated time of death rendered the post-dated email an impossibility, and archivists who maintained chain-of-custody documentation through 2 winters and 1 relocation of the evidence facility. Their compiled assessment demonstrated that the case, though resolved, still served as instructional precedent. The physical spaces associated with the investigation returned to anonymity. The wooded setback near Powhite Parkway saw another season of overgrowth, erasing volunteer-trod paths and police markers. The campus hall where Emily once logged into a now-retired terminal hosted upgraded systems with long-term authentication storage. The apartment on South Laurel Street that had been subject to search warrants passed through several tenants, none of whom were aware that early cyberforensic teams once examined its outlets and connection hardware for trace packets and modem signatures. Even the bookstore where the email first appeared as a disquieting anomaly shifted ownership, renovated its front window, and replaced its bulletin board with a digital message screen. The quiet dissolution of physical memory stood in contrast to the preserved clarity of the archival record, which remained intact in a sealed drawer of the Richmond Municipal Evidence Vault. The email itself, its plain text, unremarkable phrasing, and formally polite tone, was reviewed repeatedly not for emotional interpretation but for structural patterning. It had been written without grammatical markers distinctive to Emily, omitted her typical sign-off, and contained neither urgency nor personalization. For 2 days after it arrived, its existence reduced concern and slowed investigative mobilization simply because digital communication, at the time, held an untested authority. The case file's final forensic addendum described this not as collective oversight but as transitional vulnerability, a reflection of an era when messages were accepted at face value because they appeared in an inbox rather than passing through verifiable authentication layers. By the time judicial proceedings concluded, new software standards mandated clearer traceability, and the teaching modules across regional academies incorporated a full analysis of the forged email as a cautionary exemplar rather than an outlier. As appellate reviews confirmed conviction parameters, Avery remained in state custody, with transfer notes indicating no behavioral incidents and no recorded communication regarding the case beyond required legal correspondence. Legal analysts, reviewing the unobtrusive nature of the trial, remarked that its significance rested not in public attention, but in refinement of procedure. Prosecutorial argumentation avoided conjecture and relied solely on chronologies, login origin, timestamp offset, metadata replication signatures, and fiber match probability. Without narrative embellishment, the evidence had followed a linear trajectory, demonstrating that post-mortem misdirection could not withstand layered forensic scrutiny indefinitely. The Richmond court, in a concise sentencing summary, emphasized the crime's defining feature as calculated concealment rather than spontaneous harm. The digital message, not the wooded site, constituted the case's central instrument. Municipal leadership, though not publicly vocal, implemented minor procedural reforms throughout 2003 and 2004 in response to internal policy review. Missing person evaluations incorporated immediate digital authentication when emails, text logs, or remote announcements followed physical disappearance. Universities updated workstation protocols, clearing caches after logouts and locking service panels previously accessible to volunteer technicians. Public computer labs reduced guest repair access and required identification logs for any individual performing hardware or software adjustments. These measures, though small, reflected the investigation's enduring consequence: acknowledgement that communication could be weaponized to distort temporal alignment. Yet in spite of procedural importance, the personal dimensions of the case remained undramatized. Emily's name disappeared from public discussion shortly after sentencing, and her family maintained privacy, releasing no retrospective statements and establishing no dedicated scholarship or memorial site. The city did not hold commemorative gatherings, and the press offered no anniversary coverage. The case did not transform into cultural shorthand, but remained inside case law and forensic guideline updates, influencing practice without public narrative. The investigators who stayed on the force into the next decade occasionally cited the Richmond file when training recruits. They pointed not to the wooded discovery or the apartment search, but to the small printed sheet sealed in archival plastic. Its header, routing data, and timestamp alignment formed a study in digital misdirection, resolved only through patience and long-term evidence retention. The fiber sample, which originally seemed ancillary, demonstrated that no collected item should be dismissed on the basis of immediate interpretive value. The notebook of login codes, once cataloged as miscellaneous repair data, proved that context evolves with tools, and materials may become evidentiary only when analysis techniques mature. These lessons, repeated across training cycles, ensured that the case's impact was cumulative rather than dramatic. In 2007, during routine vault reorganization, the Attorney General's office authorized permanent retention classification for the original evidence envelope containing the email. It would not be destroyed despite aging storage timelines because of its continued use in forensic instruction. A neutral notation was added, preserved due to methodological significance. The envelope was resealed, cataloged, and placed among cases that influenced state procedural adjustment. No language of tragedy or narrative closure accompanied the entry, only technical indexing, climate control assignment, and custody signature. The last administrative review related to the case occurred in 2010, when the Commonwealth's Forensic Oversight Board produced an internal report assessing the evolution of digital crime procedures statewide. With no reference to personal details, it attributed policy shifts to a collection of cases, among which Richmond, 2000 appeared as a quiet foundation. The report stated that early digital manipulation crimes required retrospective examination because existing investigative standards developed before electronic verification tools. This concise observation effectively marked the closing point of Emily's presence in procedural evolution. Beyond that, her case existed only as record, not as recurring training anecdote. The city moved through subsequent years with no reemergence of the Richmond file in public discourse. The I-195 corridor continued its commuter rhythm, the bookstore building passed through leases, and the campus retired its last dial-up access point. The weathered wooded setback remained unmarked, indistinguishable from any suburban greenbelt. Yet in a controlled drawer inside the municipal archive, beneath layered evidence labels and catalog stamps, the printed email persisted as artifact of a brief technological threshold when a message could speak after death not as haunting or myth, but as calculated misdirection. It was this contradiction, the quiet normalcy of a forged note and the steady dismantling of its illusion, that gave the case its ultimate shape. Resolution arrived not through revelation, but through method, through documentation that outlasted the period's uncertainty, and through the unembellished endurance of investigators who recognized that the smallest inconsistency in time, if preserved long enough, could lead to certainty.